Moving on, the issue of the ordinance modification on discharging of firearms in village limits. This is back on the agenda. I had a citizen come to see me a while back before I went on vacation and offer a perspective that I was not aware of folks who own larger parcels near the river who have historically hunted those. They're within town limits, but very different than what I think most of us think of when in town. And I know we may have at least one person who wants to speak on that issue, maybe more. Just an interested by, maybe, okay. But that's why it's back on there. And I talked to the chief, and it was not a perspective that we considered, as you may recall, the primary impetus for this coming up in the beginning was the fire range, the shooting range that the chief has put together for his department, and just a couple of incidents because of the wording. Correct me if I describe this incorrectly, where they had arrested someone and it was thrown out of court because of the language, you can fire a gun. You can't fire a gun unless you're on your own property. And when I heard that, I'm thinking of some, young road or whatever, and you shouldn't be able to fire a gun in our town. So those are the two issues we've been trying to address. But apparently, obviously, there are other issues that were not considered. So, Chief, do you want to speak on what you'd like to see changed, or?
Yeah. So the hunting on your property, I wasn't aware there was parcels in town that people have been doing that. I don't see an issue with that whatsoever. My suggestion would be simply, so that we can get around this, is have people come in and get a permit from the city manager to hunt the city. It would be for bow and arrow only. It would not be for fire. But they could continue to do that. There's only certain times of the year you hunt anyways, and most of the time they're going to be on a tree stand. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, but most of them will be on a tree stand, so they're not like shooting straight across to somewhere else.
I am not an avid hunter. I have hunted before. I shoot bows and I shoot firearms, but some people hunt from tree stands, other people shoot from blinds that are on the ground.
Right.
Generally not in the direction of other human beings.
Right.
It's not on purpose.
It would be illegal to do that whether the city says you can do that or not. That's still violating the law to shoot upon somebody else's property.
Sorry if I assumed incorrectly.
Yeah. So, my proposal would be to put it in there to allow that to occur. But I think there should be through a permit from the city manager's office, so we're aware that's going on. That way, if we get calls about it, we have something on file that says, yeah, they're authorized to do that.
I probably got approached by no less than 5 townspeople on this, and my response to all of them was that, that was not the intention of why it was mentioned. That was never mentioned with it. And in all fairness, I can say I've probably grown up running up and down most of those properties and hunting some of them and sometimes another, and just know that it's always been hunted by everybody from property owners to friends, family, and city employees.
Right.
Not to rat out Pickett, but when you saw Pickett's truck on the other side of the 571 bridge, you knew he was down in a deer stand. I think it's always been somewhat of a perk for some of the city guys to be able to hunt some of the city properties, and I think it's something that should continue to be allowed wholeheartedly. I don't know how we get around the firearm thing with anybody that does any duck hunting, because nobody really does that with a bow and arrow. But what I can always remember from my childhood was the residential property lines. And this was, again, not any legal rule I remember, but kind of the rule of thumb was 50 feet on the other side of that, and only pointing away from town was kind of, probably how everybody's dad, uncle, brother, whoever took them hunting to those places.
Do we have people on duck hunts?
What?
Do we have people in town on duck hunts?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of wood ducks down through that river bottom there.
Where are the parks, so that area where Pickett used to park and...
That's city property.
That's city property.
But
and
like,
where are the other ones?
Longeneckers, then you got Coates, then you got Bonnie Newmans, then you got Phil Wilson's, you know, and, you know, going to the north of that, I'm not as quite as well
These
versed.
properties in the county.
You got Sarvers.
It's happening here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know as much about on that side, but I do know, it's my understanding that it's these parcels. If anybody knows something else, please feel free.
Before Coate bought that down there, I mean, that was Mrs. Arnold owned it. I don't think anybody knew who owned it, so we kind of ran wild on that for a long time. Because, I mean, it was just the south end of town. But, you know, my experience living along there too has just been that everybody's been respectful in what they do and how they do it. And, you know, Fred's hunted Bonnie's property for as long as I can remember, since he lived down there, and you know, everybody tends to be respectful about it. You know, they talk to the property owners give permission, they all tend to make sure you don't got two people fighting over the same tree stand or the same feedlot, and there's people that put a lot of money into these feed plots that they're putting out to attract deer. You know, it's a year-round operation and kind of set up for what they do. So, you know, there would be some people who would be highly upset if they were no longer allowed to do that on their property. We're trying to tell them what they can and can't do like that. But at the same time, I know we can't look at and treat one set of citizens different than another within a certain reason. I don't know how we balance that.
Crazy part of this is that's been in the ordinance for years. We didn't change any of that.
Right. And again, that wasn't the intention.
I'm okay that we address it now, and I think we should address it, you know, if it's been going on for all those years and we've had no complaints about it. You know, why would you want to change something and make it so they can't do it? I don't see that's fair.
I think it's a work session, this is not to make a decision. but
Right, just to
It would
feed information
It would be
and
helpful
food for
if you
thought.
can provide some guidance to myself or Ms. Roche on how you want to proceed if we're going to make any other changes to the ordinance.
Brandon, if you don't mind the question, does your family primarily do boat hunting down there?
We will, I don't know how to say this out loud, it's illegal right now.
Well, before, but with the ordinance
So
says
people gun hunt and they bow hunt in the valley. Gun season's 1 week a year.
1 week,
You'll hear shots periodically coming
Sure.
from the river valley, whether it's on this side of the river
Right.
or over on Joe Wilson's property across the river,
Right.
or anybody else that lives over there. You can't tell. You can't tell if it's
No.
Longenecker shooting over right next door to my dad's property.
Sure.
Because it just echoes there's not much down there. But,
Right.
I've never heard of any problems with anybody hunting down there. Fred called my dad today, asked permission if he could go on his property to find a deer he'd shot.
Yes.
It's not, people are just trespassing like crazy, everybody has respect for each other, and I've never heard of any issues with hunting in town.
Well, the way the ordinance is now, technically it is, but it's not. Because that's the reason why it's being addressed, is because it's at odds with itself, right? So,
The problem you have is that you can't open that up because then it opens the whole city up. You've got to find a happy medium somewhere in there where you either get a permit, you allow it on certain places, because if you just open it up and say, yeah, you can bow hunt, what's to keep you from bow hunting on Forest Drive?
I think it's the permit system, to be fair. I think it's somebody at the city building, the police department, the safety department, whatever you want to call it, would be, you know, reasonable as far as understanding that, you know, Coate's property is very different than mine on
Right.
Main Street.
Could you draw a line on the size of the parcel?
And that's the thing that I think is important, that if you get a permit, somebody lays eyes on it and says, yeah, that's something, not an issue, versus someone who comes in and lives right in the middle of town, they got less than 1/4 acre land, and they want to hunt. First of all, what comes across your land you want to hunt? Yeah. You know, so I think that, to me, that's the fair way to do it, because there, you know, every city has pieces of property that's large enough to hunt on. Most all cities do. Even when I worked in the city of Beaver Creek, we had the same situation where there was parcels of farm property in the middle of town, but we had a gun ordinance and a bow ordinance, but they were allowed to hunt on those properties with permission from the city manager. And the only nice thing about that is, we got notice in the police division, so that when we got those complaints, we knew it was somebody out there hunting. We could still go look, to investigate, and once you got there and determine, oh, it's the homeowner, no big deal, they got a permit, we move on. We tell the caller, quit calling. They have permission.
Some of those properties down through there too have been, up until the last, I don't know, maybe 15 years, maybe 20, but some of them have been agricultural. Where, you know, the bottom acreage next to Coates, the old J place, you know, that 34 acres of bottomland was in crop up until, and I don't know if Bill Wilson's used to be or not, because I can remember riding dirt bikes on that in the 80s, so I don't think it was, but I don't know, you know, that kind of changes things too, but.
Was the permit go with the property or the individual that was hunting?
It should go with the individual that's hunting.
It'd have to be linked to the property, wouldn't it?
Right, it would be both of those. Otherwise, well, you could do it either way. I guess you could do it on the property. The owner could come in and get a permit as long as he knows who's on his property.
I don't ever remember getting a tree stand without having a signed letter from the property owner that allowed me to hunt too. That's just kind of good business as a hunter. You know, and being respectful of someone else's property.
If you did it by the individual and they brought a letter in from the property owner, then we could put it all on
Yeah,
file.
okay, that, yes, yes.
And that would be the easiest way
But
to
the
do
permit
it.
would be limited to that property owner's property.
Right.
That would work.
And then could you do it for the whole length of the season?
Sure.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to charge them a fee.
And
We're not looking to charge it. I wouldn't advocate charging a fee. I would just, it's just a courtesy type thing to make sure that if we get any complaints, you're allowed to do this.
I think it's important to consider too, when you do look at gun season and what people hunt. You know, we don't use high-powered rifles in the state of Ohio or anything like that. It's either shotgun slug or now we can use straight wall cartridge.
They can pistol hunt for a week too.
So it's not like people blazing away with things that go really far distances. And if someone is duck hunting or something like that, you're talking about a shotgun that is very limited range, very scattered, and not lethal past, you know, depending on what they're using, a fair distance. It's a fairly safe form of hunting. And I would say anybody with a hunting license generally should be aware of knowing what's behind what they're shooting at. And I don't think any of our property owners would let, you know, idiots down on their property, and, you know, it's just not the kind of property owners.
So what I'm hearing is permits by the person that have to be accompanied by
Permission.
some notification of the property owner where they're going to hunt. And it will be good for a year. Does that sound like language you could work into it with Renee?
Right, are you also going to put specific size of the property?
I think that's going to be at the discretion of the police department and the manager, and we'll have to look at the size of the parcel. You may have language that it may be denied based on the size of the parcel
And the location.
and the location, something like that. Does that seem reasonable to the council?
Of course, this could also be resolved by simply removing the disallowance of bows and arrows being shot at city limits.
Here.
I mean, we talked about this at the last meeting. Everything besides the firearms, I think, is it's an overreach or not needed.
Which is something we want to do regardless of the hunting issue.
Right. Well, I'm saying if you do that, the hunting becomes a non-issue because if you can shoot your bow
Yeah.
on your land, then...
That doesn't accompany duck hunting.
No, it doesn't. It may still need
Yeah.
that for the firearm portion, yes.
What if you did this with the bow hunting? I think there's also an issue, not just bow hunting, but people bow target shooting. So I think you're going to have something in there that says they must have the proper backstop before they're in violation, because there's a big difference from shooting your bow and arrow down on Mr. Coates' property versus shooting your bow and arrow in the backyard on Forest Drive.
I mean, have we had issues? Do we ever have issues with bow and arrow?
We've never, but you're opening it up to allow it. So my problem is going to be from us, from the police standpoint, what teeth do we have into it if I have a complaint? Because the neighbor keeps shooting the bow and arrow over into the neighbor's yard, into their tree.
But that's because they're shooting it into their yard, not that they're shooting the bow, it's that the result of that action.
Isn't there something in here about shooting onto or across somebody else's property?
That's a gun.
Okay, gotcha.
There's two.
I was just kind of talking with Brandon at one point, just we ran into each other, and he had mentioned something about the state of Ohio, and do you have that?
So, yeah, if I can.
What the
say one
state
other
says?
thing, too. When we're talking about bows and arrows, and permits, just as a citizen, I would be adamantly opposed to having to come to City Hall to ask for permission to hunt, to bow hunt. That just seems, I know it's not a big deal, but you're going to have kids that are hunting. Are we going to make kids come up here and say, you know, you have to have a permit to hunt on the property when you're a 14-year-old because you're down there hunting with your dad or with your grandpa or with your uncle? It's West Milton. It's not Chicago. And I know that there are parts of town
Chicago.
that are closer in proximity to other houses. That doesn't mean you have to allow people to shoot bow and arrows across property lines to other people's houses, but I'm sure that there are people sitting here that have kids that are shooting bow and arrows in their backyards, and that you are supervising them as a parent and making sure that they're doing it safely. I get it, it's on the books now, but my opinion would be to get rid of it. But as far as state law and the discharge of firearms, so this is not the first time that I have looked into the issue of the discharge of firearms in city limits in Ohio. I've had other people ask me about it as well, and I was asked to come tonight to talk about it a little bit, not from Sarah, but from other people. But Ohio has a law on the discharge of firearms already, and I'm positive that Lene knows that. I'm sure she's looked at it too. And it prescribes where you are allowed to discharge a firearm. Ohio also has a law, Revised Code 9.68, that explicitly states that local municipalities cannot further restrict certain firearm regulations beyond what state law says. It further states that if you do that, and a citizen sues the village or any other municipality and wins, that you shall pay their attorney's fees. It doesn't even say that the court may order attorney's fees, it says the court shall order attorney's fees. That law was passed in 2007. The Ohio Supreme Court interpreted that to mean that cities' local home rule authority that a lot of cities like to use to regulate beyond what the state laws typically do, that home rule does not apply in laws of general applicability. And that revised code statute is one of those such laws. So they said home rule does not apply in firearms regulations. So you can't regulate beyond what state law says. In 2017, there was a Court of Appeals case in the 8th Circuit Court, or 8th District Court of Appeals out of Cleveland, where Cleveland had sought to restrict the discharge of firearms at certain places. It wasn't even as comprehensive as what West Milton is doing, and that's discharge prohibition completely. So the city's ordinance here says you can't shoot a gun at all. Cleveland wasn't even trying to do that, and a court in Cleveland said that that violated state law. And the Court of Appeals out of the 8th District said it violated the state law, so that the city of Cleveland could not make that restriction. So when the city of Cleveland sought to appeal that decision to the Ohio Supreme Court let that decision stand and refused to hear the appeal. As far as I know, our district has not considered that issue. So I would certainly say that it's possible that this part of Ohio might be more liberal than what Northeast Ohio is. I doubt that. But I would certainly be concerned that you would be opening the city up to litigation on that issue. I know of people already that have told me that they would want to pursue that. That is, again, not to say that you can discharge a gun anywhere in city limits, because that's not what the state law says. But the state law has a certain set of restrictions that you can have on the discharge of firearms. Westville can go by the state law or have a city ordinance that is the same as the state law and is not contradicted. But that's the limit, in my opinion, as a concerned citizen, and what other people wanted me to convey to you, to at least consider that. Certainly you are the council and do what you think is best, but I would give great consideration to that and maybe pause for a minute on the outright ban of the discharge of firearms in city limits.
Brandon, are you referring to discharging into a habitation?
It is, I'll give you the code section. And this ordinance has been around, or this statute has been around for a long time. So it has sort of strange language in it, but it's 2923-162.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Discharge of firearm on or near prohibited premises.
Can you read that again,
2923.162. So it's not just on habitation.
So what brought that law about? Was all the drive-by shootings that were taking place?
So it's lots of things. It says don't shoot over a cemetery, amongst other things.
But that's what really spawned that whole thing, because I was around when that came about. But that's really what started it, is we had so many drive-by shootings in the state going on, and there was little to no litigation that you could do to people that shot into homes. And so we were having innocent people shot, and that's what really drove that for the legislators to bring that about.
Can you read that side again? I'm sorry.
2923.162.
And
It's discharge of firearm on or near prohibited premises.
the code section that was adopted by the legislature to limit restrictions on firearms to just at the state level was 9.68. And the point of it, according to the legislature, is so that there's a uniform set of gun laws in the state of Ohio. So when you go from Troy to Cleveland, you're not violating the law because there's a different gun law in every city you go to. That's the general idea of it. Whether or not, again, it would apply here, it's not for me to say, but I would at least give it consideration before you act upon the proposed ordinance.
So I guess from what you read in there, I mean, all we're trying to accomplish here, or the reason it got brought up in the first place, is so that the police can shoot at the shooting range. Do we need to do anything?
You're asking the wrong person. I would say that they can do that now, I would think.
Okay,
I don't
based
know
on
if
what
there's anything
state law
prohibiting,
says, right?
I don't think there's anything prohibiting law enforcement in it. I think that state law even expressly states that it doesn't apply if you're doing it with permission or under lawful authority. I didn't look that close at that issue, so I apologize.
Well, I was going to suggest perhaps loading a copy of the state ordinance and review it before we continue the conversation. That makes sense?
So it sounds like no matter what, though, we know we've got stuff on the books that needs to be updated and brought into some realism.
Well, if you want to create grief, then why would you not bring suit? Because it sounds like the municipality shall pay the legal bills for...
It doesn't say if you win.
Yeah.
It says
Right.
That'll be the next step. Renee, if you or somebody just get a copy and we'll get it distributed application.
Interpretation, how the preemption law decided may conflict with if we do something more than what 2923.162 already says.
Thank you, Mr. Coate.
And I would be remiss not to take the opportunity to tell you how great your building looks since you bought the old bank, and
Those look very nice.
yeah, so, much appreciated. I couldn't think of what anybody would do with that building for,
Everybody's told me how disappointed they are that it's a law office, because they wanted it to be a restaurant.
you know, I'm just glad that it looks great, and you made an old building updated and more valuable than when it came into your possession, I'm sure.
Well, thank you.
So,
I'm more impressed you're a Ford owner. I'm proud of that.
Me and my wife had our wedding reception in that basement.
No kidding.
It probably looks exactly the same as when you had it. Nothing in the basement.
All right, unless there's more discussion on that item, the next one's pretty simple.